Ladies and gentlemen, we have a very special guest tonight, CF Gingara, on location at the Australian bushfires. Now, intense thunderstorms have brought hail and strong rains to some regions of Australia where bushfires have been burning at an unprecedented scale. Farmers and firefighters alike are celebrating the rain, which has helped disperse smoke in Melbourne and could dampen some of the bushfires, but certainly not put them out. Now, the Australian Bureau of Meteorology, however, has been weary to celebrate, calling the thunderstorms a double-edged sword. The storms have ushered in a host of new problems like flooding, mud flows. We're well aware of those out here, CF. And lightning strikes have even sparked at least 2 new fires in the Great Otway National Park. And unfortunately, with lightning strikes like out here, it's not always the next day that a fire pops up. They, in fact, smolder for sometimes several days. So there's one problem. These fires can smolder around trees and root systems for days. And the bushfires in Australia, just for some factual information to get you up to speed, have burned an estimated 15.6 million acres since July 1st, which the government has struggled to contain despite international support. Now, I reported just a few hours ago on a small stand of very ancient trees that they actually did save, which is raising my eyebrow to why they didn't save people's homes over some trees in the middle of nowhere. But we'll get to that in a minute. At least 24 people have died, millions of animals have perished across the country, and people have been forced to flee their homes and their farms. Thousands of which homes and farms have been set ablaze. And now, while the New South Wales Rural Fire Service spokesperson is hopeful about the rain, tweeting this, relief is here for a number of firefighters working across New South Wales. They noted that the storms alone will not put out the current fires, period. And welcome to the show, CF Gingara. And what say you on the storms and the fires?
Yeah, Diamond. So definitely the fires are really hit and miss, and they've in some areas dropped 50, 80, 100 millimetres in a very short period of time. But those have been very cellular and very localised. On a whole, the rain has been largely in the 10 to 15 millimetre mark on the first day. There's more rain falling in certain locations today. But the widespread rain that could potentially be beneficial for dampening some of these fires is most likely to arrive Monday and Tuesday next week. So there's been a tremendous amount of excitement around all this rain. You know, there are pictures and videos of farmers dancing in the rain, and you name it. It's great to see. I did a little video this morning in the fire zone, which is closest to my property, and the bush is already starting to recover. You know, the fire stopped there 10 days ago, and there's already green sprouts coming up from that first rain. It's an absolutely amazing thing to see when you get out into the bush and you go, it's alive again. It's firing away. It's no longer just this black mess.
Well, that's certainly good news. And before we continue, for those who don't know who CF Gingara is, he has a YouTube channel. You might also know him on Facebook as solarminimum.net. Come subscribe to his channel. All the links will be below. But the reason that we love CF is not only is he a fan of the channel and the science behind what's happening on the earth currently, he's also a former firefighter in the bush in Australia. So he actually has experience. He knows what's going on. And he's a high commodity. Like, people in Australia probably want to pay him a couple dollars to come on their show. And so we get him for free, you know, at the drop of a hat, really. And that's impressive. So now let's talk about some of the articles that you have sent me over the last 24 hours. Which I thought was very interesting, because as I looked at the articles and then I did a quick search for news articles over the last 18 hours, and this one popped up, the one that's on the screen right now. Intense thunderstorms bring relief and problems. Now, one of the problems they didn't talk about in the article was water quality issues. So not only do we have these dangerous mud flow potential, and so we have mudslide and mud flow potential. We have debris flow potential. Normal arteries that are creeks during these rains can get choked with material. They can make mud dams fill with debris that break through and cause severe flooding. So that's the first issue. The second issue, that all this ash from these fires, some of which is near cities, are toxic. And this is going to percolate down into the subsurface, especially run off directly into the rivers and streams and kill fish. So let's just talk about it and start at the beginning, CF, and tell me what you know.
Okay, so basically the biggest issue is that the breadth and width of the fires means that large amounts of the water catchment areas for towns and cities around the east coast of Australia are completely burnt. There's no areas where there is unburnt land, and that means that under these large thunderstorms that are occurring, where there is intense rainfall occurring, as you said, the land can't hold the water, can't slow it down. There's no compost, there's no leaf material, there's no bark, there's no grasses or sphagnum moss or anything like that to slow it down. And so the water accelerates and it erodes a tremendous amount. And then when it gets into the actual rivers themselves, the chemistry changes because of the amount of carbon and ash in the soil going into the rivers. And so as you can see there on that picture there, because of the chemistry changes, what occurs is that the oxygen gets depleted in the water. And so literally anything that requires oxygen in the water dies. Now that can be as many things as fish, yabbies, shrimps, all the water insects, quite often are all just floating on the surface. So they die very quickly when the chemistry of the water changes. Now this is occurring across hundreds of rivers across the east coast of Australia because of the fires. Now, when you do quite hazard reduction burns, you do small compartments of fire hazard reduction, and it means that you don't get large tracts of this sort of damage occurring, and then the water supply is generally good. But this has been across entire catchment zones, and we learned some very big lessons back in 2003 here in Canberra when the large firestorm occurred here, and it took out Canberra's water supply entirely. The mountain dams all were taken offline, and we were left with one dam which had some reticulation issues. And for a number of years we were on very high water restrictions until those mountain dams came back online. They then put in a new big dam, and then they found some of the chemistry of the soils some 10 years on were causing water quality issues. So it's a long-term issue. The different types of chemicals that reside in the Australian eucalypt trees are an issue as well. So I don't know if you know, but the eucalypt tree has cyanide in its leaf, and the cyanide gets released into the atmosphere when it's burnt, but a good amount of it actually gets dropped in the ash. And so we end up getting cyanide into the water supply itself. And so they have to put in tremendous amounts of extra water filtration. Very expensive to do.
So what we're looking at is a need for permaculture restoration here. You need to be completely changing the landscape in Australia in a type of on contour swale system, which is easy to do. You just make grooves on contour. And if people don't know what that is, please Google the term contour. You just stay at the same elevation, make a line, so that behind that, the water is caught and can percolate through the soil and be filtered. If you made 1,000 or 10,000 of these scratches using elevation in your region, it would slow all this process down, would catch all that cyanide, which would allow it to be remediated, which would eventually create new soils in a year or so, and the microbiome would help break that down. You wouldn't get these fish kills. Now, the one thing I want to interject here is that an entire fish kill or a scrubbing of an ecosystem like this is not the end-all, be-all. These systems rebound very quickly. Within a decade, it's going to be like nothing ever happened, and maybe even better if there are some mitigating things that are implemented in the interim. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. Absolutely, totally agree. And there's been similar fish kills that have occurred from large floods in the past in the Murray River, where they've had black water events where old sediment has been ripped up from the bottom, and the rivers have gone black, and it's killed 1,000 kilometres of that river. And that's that picture there. There's a whole article on that there, PDF, around the Blackwater events after fires. But they come back. They all come back. And even in the little video that I did this morning, when I went out to the Talaganda National Park to where the Black Range fire was, I showed a really little swale. It was probably only 5 or 6 inches tall, but it was a natural swale that caught all of the charcoal and ash, and it was just sitting there nicely. And there was already a brand new shoot of a flax grass coming through it. And those sorts of areas are going to be fantastic for soil in the future.
Yeah, I just planted like 3 or 4 pounds of flaxseed in my backyard. I do it right before a heavy snow, so it gets pushed down into the soil ready for the spring. And it also gets cold stratified,
Yep.
which flaxseed needs the cold stratification. It needs to freeze to think it's winter and then sprout. And so I wanted to know, let's talk about more water quality issues if they exist. Guys, if you're watching the podcast, you're going to get the free 40-page paper here, so please take a look at it. Is there any talk about groundwater and wells? And how does the burn area affect local groundwater and people that have wells near these rivers?
Yeah, so it takes time for those wells to be impacted. As you know, the sediment here in Australia is very ancient, and so it takes a long time for water to get into the ground, and the percolation rates are in the hundreds to thousands of years. So for those people who have a well below 30 metres in depth, they probably won't be impacted by it. But people who have shallow wells of 10 to 15 metres might be impacted within 12 to 15 months of this, by the time it then sinks down through the sediment to that layer. But it really depends on the soils that are around those wells, and whether or not the actual chemistry of the toxic water is actually cleansed by either the sand or the sediment above their wells.
So I want to delve, and I thank you for the explanation. Real quick, Giles, I want to delve into the fact that a lot of this devastation, which doesn't need to happen, there could be mitigating practices using permaculture principles to mitigate a lot of this runoff and this harmful effects to the biome. But still, also, we could have the burning of the undergrowth and the correct forest management needed. And the problem herein lies with the political system. It's the greenies, is what you guys call them over there in Australia. The greenies are responsible for this damage. It's not you. It's not CO2. I mean, we found that the majority of the fires are sparked by jackasses that light them themselves, and people that are visiting Australia that are inconsiderate of laws and inconsiderate of Mother Nature and just light the forest on fire. Same thing happens out here. Almost 90% of all forest fires human caused these days. It's been proven worldwide. It doesn't matter where you live, how rural it is. 90% of all the fires are caused by idiots. The other 10% is usually lightning. And in our area, the lightning fires are put out because they're being monitored. The idiot fires aren't being monitored because we don't know where the idiots are. But let's get back to the policy part here. The policy part is that I just did an update, and I found this article that just came out that there was actual tax dollars in Australia spent. Firefighters were sent to save an endangered dinosaur tree from the raging bushfires. Can you imagine the resources that it cost in this remote area to save a small stand of trees while farms and animals, horses, and people were burning? Can you speak to that? Because I don't get it.
Yeah, I can. And I actually spent a bit of time as the president of my local brigade and a senior officer in the brigade, working through our asset protection list for our zone. And in many circumstances, the councils that we live within, which are the local government areas, They have forced many specific environmental areas into those forest protection plans and fire protection plans where they rate some of the environmental components as a higher priority to save than people's farms and lives. So it's in my area in particular.
Wait a minute. Stop. Let me get this straight. In Australia, there are policies in place that will save a tree before it saves a person.
Agreed. It's quite disgusting. Now, those trees in particular, I can understand some of the priority around them because they're an ancient tree which they found about 20 years ago. They are enormously long-lived. There's only a couple of hundred of them in existence around the world. But now people are making money out of those seeds from those trees. And so there's an economy around those trees and collecting more seeds from them so they can grow more of them. And so it's really disturbing because there's no longer what is more important, as you said? Is it life? Is it people's farms and their own ability to actually grow their own food or to provide food for others, or is it a couple of trees which regrow from fire? And the Wollemi pine will regrow after fire.
Well, it's truly this is a lesson in crony capitalism, one that has been told time and time again. Starting from the poisoning of our food with the multinational corporations that now own almost 75% of all life on Earth, the seed that we grow food from, they're owned by corporations. And these same corporations then sell off the rights to their seed to other multinational corporations that produce the chemicals that the seeds are tolerant to. It's a big game.
Right.
And so here the multinational corporation that's making money off of this tree seed is doing the same thing. They're pulling the strings to protect the trees, to protect their stockholders. If you think that a government is elected to protect you and represent you at this day and age, I don't know where you've been for the last 3 decades. We've been reporting on the crony capitalism and the lack of democracy or representational democracy worldwide. The United States is not a representational government of the people. Australia is even worse, based on what I'm seeing from the other side of the world, of a representational government of the people. And we have lost control. And what happens every time when we lose control of the empire is the empire crumbles, because they go into a downspin, a spiral. And we're about to be in some very serious times, politically, economically, with the markets. And they are still gorging us for every single penny they can. And this company clearly wants to protect us, and they paid people off to do it, while farms burned. And that's disgusting. And it's a sad state of affairs. But what else can we do, Niles? Or Giles, what else can we do? Is there anything we can do?
Look, the reality is part of the big problem that we had with these fires is that they exceeded the amount of firefighting capability across the country. When that fire was burning in that area, my understanding was there was no properties at risk at the same time. So they chose to do a strategic go in and protect these ancient trees. Now, 24 hours later, that fire was damaging houses. Now, there's another real big article that's been in the news here in Australia in the last 24 hours, and that is a fire captain from one of the towns south of Sydney has now gotten into a lot of trouble because he told his local people in his area that they needed to evacuate, and he did that without permission from the RFS and the state government. And what happened is that he knew the amount of fire potential in that area, and he knew the fuel load that was there. It hadn't burnt for 60 odd years, and so the fuel load was enormous. Unfortunately, what had happened is that there were a bunch of people who didn't listen to him, but the majority of the town did, and they all got out. The fire was so aggressive that the flames were 200 feet high, Diamond. They were enormous, and there were 40 or 50 houses that just got all wiped out in an hour or two. The fuel load was huge. The news afterwards was that the RFS and their data modelers had not accurately reported on the amount of potential danger in that area, and they told everybody, "Oh, you'll be fine. The fire won't be that bad there." But the local captain with the local knowledge was the one who knew it was going to be dangerous. And this happens across all of the different zones around, is that we rely on the local captains and the local fire brigades and the local environmentalists and all that to know their local area. But we keep on being overridden by inappropriate data and analytics, and organisations and governments that are using modern technology to use a computer model which can be manipulated to assess danger patterns and fire growth patterns and things like that. And they're not right. They're not accurate because they don't understand the local impacts and the local assessments. It's really disturbing, because what's going to happen in the next couple of months is that there'll be a royal commission of some sort where a large investigation will occur across all the fires that have happened, and that royal commission will probably make a lot of this visible to the rest of the world, what we did wrong. And what we did wrong is we didn't listen to the locals well enough.
Yeah, you can't deny experience. And what we can learn from past mistakes is that computer models are fake, and they typically do not represent reality. What we do know is that human experience represents reality, which is why as we get older,
Correct.
we get wiser. Which is why people like to listen to people like you and I that have experience in the fields we talk about, because we're not making it up and we didn't read the local headline. We're talking from experience and from the heart. There is no script in this podcast. Nothing but love, Giles. We thank you for joining us from the other side of the world. Is there anything else you want to add?
No, look, and what I say to all your fantastic viewers are, Diamond and I never have a script for anything we do. We just chat because we're mates, and it's a great opportunity to share with your viewers. It really is. Thank you.
Thank you, Giles. We love you. Check out CF Jingara on YouTube and be the change you want to see. Do it now.